Hi, and welcome to What's Your Next Move? Aging on Your Own Terms. I'm Addie.
And I'm her mom, Lisa.
And today we're talking about Alzheimer's, how it affected our family, some strategies and solutions to deal with it in your own home, and also some preventative measures you can take.
Well, let's dive in.
So today we're talking a lot about Alzheimer's and dementia, which is not the most fun topic.
No. It's something a lot of people don't want to talk about. It's almost like for fear that you're going to catch it.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. But it's something that a lot of people deal with. I have a lot of personal experience with it. I also have professional experience with it. I have friends that have parents that have passed away from it, even at young ages. So I've got a lot of connection to it, but my mom's connection to it actually started more in a professional sense. So you know that she is an interior designer, an entrepreneur. She's owned her own company for 25 years, and she specializes in senior living facilities that are kind of resort style. But she also creates really amazing spaces for people that have Alzheimer's and dementia. And she designs them to care for people's souls, which is really cool.
Probably one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah. But when did this real personal connection start for you?
So the real personal connection is we have a lot of old people in our family. My great grandfather was 92 when he passed. So that's a long time ago. I'm 55. Addie and Jake had 6 great grandparents alive at one time.
Yeah.
I feel like we were incredibly blessed. We basically, until my grandparents were very, very old, I don't even remember ever going to funerals. Everybody just stayed alive forever. Retired at 50, or earlier if they were homemakers, like my grandmother. And, what had happened was my grandmother was living with my mom and dad, and they were helping to take care of you guys when you're in school.
Yep.
So you would go for breakfast, and then
I would be with grandma most of the day and with great grandma, and
you would then you get right after school, and then Addie would inevitably forget her lunch, and I would say, she's not going to starve to death. Let her, learn a lesson. And grandma would haul her butt right to the school and bring her lunch over and over again. And her great grandma cooked a lot, and she baked, and she was excellent at it. She would make pies and all kinds of things. And I remember coming home one time and seeing a cupcake. And instead of it being frosted like my grandmother would just make it beautiful, she frosted not only the top part, but she frosted the paper part on the bottom. And it still gets me a bit upset to this day, because it felt like I lost a piece of her that day. Like that I knew she wasn't the same person. And we would have to treat the situation differently. That's something a child does. But when a child does it, you're like, yay, you frosted the cupcake.
You tried.
Yeah. And when your grandma does it, you're like, yay, no. We're losing you. We're losing a piece of you. And so how do you stay happy in that moment? Because she was happy with what she did.
Yeah. And I think that's also why we're telling this story, is because we know that so many people out there have had very similar moments with your friends, with your family, with your parents, where they just do something that they've always done and they've known it for your whole life. And then they act out of the norm.
Yeah.
And you realize that maybe something is happening. And can be a very sad moment. But also, we have a lot of solutions and a lot of things that we can get into. But first, I wanted to talk to you also about, so we've heard a little bit
You're
about
just going to bring it right back up, aren't you? Right back up. It was almost a big tearjerker there. Now you're just going to bring it right back up. Okay.
So we've spoken a little bit about your personal connection to Alzheimer's. And so where did your professional connection, though, start? Because it's kind of a strange thing to be a specialist in this. So where does that initiate? Yeah.
So we're just going right back up. We took you to the low, and now we're going right back up again. Okay. So my professional is, I was working in a hospital system and I was a designer, and we had, the average stay was, I think, like 3 days, and they started doing it, or 6 days, and it started going down to 3 for open heart surgery. And this new thing called senior living came about. And so I decided to move into that because I thought I could affect people for the last 2 years of their life. Back in the day, that's how long you spent in senior living. You stayed in your home, and it wasn't until your last 2 years. Now, this wasn't like resort style. I'm going to go play tennis in Florida,
which is a lot of what you design.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this was more like I need a lot of care. And the company that I worked for, Carrington, a lot of care, was super cool. And they did these, that I'm aware of, first ever purpose-built Alzheimer's and dementia homes. And what we would do is make the inside of, and this is like almost 30 years ago, make the inside of the home look like a town. Wow. And so they could wander around, they could go to the bank, they could go to the hair salon, they could go to the office.
And I remember going there, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever because you could go to the pet shop and you could go to the movie theater and you could go all these places. And as a kid, getting to kind of roam around and act like an adult, or it was a very similar experience I had to, they had this thing called BizTown.
Yep.
And you could go and pretend to be a radio host, which, you know, sounds accurate now.
Sounds pretty accurate.
Sounds pretty accurate. But yeah, it had a very similar feel to me. But I also, actually, as a kid understood how amazing it was to kind of give these people their independence back in a controlled, safe environment.
So, you know, when you do things for a long time, it becomes kind of rote. And you might have worked in a certain job for 50 years or 60 or 70. A lot of these folks worked a lot younger than we have. You know, they started working when they were 9 or 10, those types of things. So if you went to the office every day, and now you've lost some of your short-term memory, but your long-term memory is going to the office every day, you want to go to the office every day. So providing a space that they could go to the office every day. You know, a lot of the ladies thought that they were just, you know, newly married with a baby. So having baby dolls that really had their eyes open, were the correct weight, that they could be fed and changed and feel purposeful. Dress up areas, pet areas, just really have a great day. And it's not our job to judge. Like, it just back to my grandma. It wasn't for me to tell her she did the cupcake wrong or she was capable of more. It was to meet her where she was and to say, that's great, Grandma. Thank you so much for helping. I love it. You know, not to be caught up in what she used to be, but to meet her where she was today and help her to have a better day.
Right. So your passion for that stems from working in the hospital and kind of seeing how you could help all these people. Is that right?
Part of it. They were going in the hospital. It was becoming very much about open heart surgeries and things like that. It's kind of, a hospital system is based on what gets paid for and what's the biggest sickness right then. So cancer was really big, having babies was really big, and heart problems were really big. Seniors were kind of getting pushed out. Psych wards, which used to be a thing where you could go get psychiatric services, were almost going away. And then Alzheimer's and dementia, people looked at that like almost like AIDS, like something you could catch. And so people didn't talk about it. They didn't want anyone to know anyone in their family had it, because, and people still do that today.
Right. And that also kind of relates back. We've talked about that before, of people being afraid to ask for help or to communicate with their loved ones because they're super afraid that they're going to be forced and put into an Alzheimer's dementia care facility if they admit that they can't remember where they put their keys.
Exactly. And there's a huge difference between, I can't remember where I put my keys, to I just iced the paper part of the cupcake.
And a perfect example of that is that my grandma, she says to me all the time that she swears that I have Alzheimer's because she asked me to go get something and I forget it, and I'm just a forgetful young person. But it is a very different thing of losing kind of that short-term memory,
Right.
and your regular skills that you're capable of doing, you kind of lose your memory of how to do those.
Right.
But you know, great grandma still remembered that she played the violin and that she did all these really amazing things.
She did. And a lot of times too, it could be something that could be fixed. It could be a UTI, urinary tract infection, that can mimic signs of dementia. And that's a very dangerous thing. If you don't take somebody to the doctor and get them checked, it can be a very simple thing. They could be dehydrated. They could have had a stroke. There's tons of different things. That's why to ignore it, you really need to be careful. And you also need to be careful because, you know, it seems like when family members are away and then they come home for the holidays, they go, oh, well, mom's losing it. Mom's this, mom's that. And you can't really like diagnose things in a short period of time. When you're stressed out, your brain acts a little differently. And I'm sorry, but the holidays are stressful when you got everybody
stressful
coming in.
for everybody.
They are very stressful. So you have to really get and engage with professionals, but there's also certain things you can do in diet and exercise and being with other people, and then design and technology.
Yeah. So when you like to design for someone, like for seniors or for specifically people with Alzheimer's dementia, you kind of just investigate the person as a whole, the medical side as a whole, and then you design the space around that whole experience. Instead of just being like, okay, we want to design a nice room that people get to stay in and they can enjoy it. That's great. But really, all of this is the placement of the medical equipment. You've explained to me before where they've, you know, the room in the hospital wasn't designed properly because when you bring in all the equipment that you would need for someone to resuscitate someone, it doesn't fit in there.
Right.
So you have to think about kind of all scenarios when you have this mix of design and medical kind of things in the same space.
It is. It's a holistic way of looking at things. And what I know, and I'm certainly not an expert in, you know, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, I'm not a caregiver, although I helped care for my grandmother. So I have that intimately. And then my mother-in-law didn't care for her, but was around her quite a bit while she had it and before she passed. And what I can tell you is that every person and every day of dementia or Alzheimer's is like a snowflake. And it's different. And one day it's a good day and the next day it's not. And one day this works and the next day it doesn't. And so you got to kind of learn to roll with the punches, I guess is the best way to say it. Have fun. Really appreciate when everybody's in the moment. And you know, that's part of the reason why we wrote the book Hive. And I say like we wrote the book, but because it really was, you know, a family thing. Addie did all the drawings in here of how we changed the floor plans. My son, you know, designed the cover. It really was. Greg's Kemper House came out of this.
Yeah. So Hive is a book that my mom wrote that was about our family, multi-generational living, aging in place technology, and then also specifically living with great grandma. So we had 4 generations in one household. Again, it was me, my brother, my mom, my dad, my grandma, my grandpa, and my great grandma who had Alzheimer's.
That sounds like a lot.
It's a lot. It was.
That sounds like a lot. But like a hive, and that's why we called it that, was we all had our jobs. So there were the worker bees. Grandma was obviously the queen bee. And my mom was a primary caregiver. So really, my mother, who was also, they were best friends, my grandmother and her, my mother got the biggest burden on her. And so a lot of my job was coaching my mother, designing the space so that it would support my mom's caregiving and also not make my mom a prisoner in the home, because grandma started getting paranoid, never wanted her to leave, those types of things.
Right.
So doing all those types of things, you would think I was designing for my grandmother. But I was just as much, if not more, designing for my mom, who was the primary caregiver.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I wanted to also speak a little bit about my own experience living with great grandma Lily. So my grandma was obviously the primary caregiver, like my mom was saying. And but I had a lot of experiences with great grandma Lily, and I on kind of a second tier would be the person who great grandma would go to when she was worried about something. And also I was the one who could convince her to take her pills.
You could. I don't know how you did it, but you were like a master magician.
Yeah. And my grandma, God love her, she would just try to have my great grandma take her vitamins, take her regular medication that she's supposed to be taking daily. And it was almost always a battle. You're trying to poison me. I've already took my pills. All these things.
Well, I can tell you one of the biggest failures was I thought, oh, I'm smarty pants, right? I'm going to get like a planner. You know how grandmas have these little tiny planners, almost like a checkbook, and have the dates in there. And so I thought, okay, this is fantastic. I'm going to have grandma put a sticker down every time on the day when she's taking her pill in the morning and then the middle of the day. And then, so that worked for like 2 days.
Right.
2 days. And then grandma said, nope, you put that sticker there.
Yep, and she wasn't trusting anything.
And so I'm like, okay, all right, I got you, grandma. Sign off on it. Like, you put your signature. Nobody can fake that.
Right.
And then she was like, no, you faked my signature. And I felt like a little bit like we were in a Twilight Zone episode where she felt like she was being trapped in a prison and everybody was conspiring against her.
Right.
And lying to her. And so what did we do? What was the brilliant solution? Throw the high school kid into it and just said, it's your responsibility. You got to take care of it.
Right. And also, I mean, I felt good about taking that burden off of Mama. I felt really bad that I could just go in there and be like, hey, great grandma, here's your pills. Like, can you take them for me? And she would say, oh, I already took them. And I'd say, I know you did, but if you could just do it for me, that would be really nice. I promise, like, if you already took them, we just won't take them tomorrow. And I would just make up something. And she would look at me like I was half nuts. And she would still take them at the end.
I think, honestly, she thought, oh, poor little Addie. I'm just going to do this for her.
Yeah, I do think she was doing me a favor.
I think she was totally doing you a favor. Because we would find, like, when she was doing them by herself, we started finding these Kleenexes wadded up and shoved down in the side of the recliner. And then you got it out and it was like pills. So it was like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest where they're like hiding the pills. Or
right.
Like put them in the side of their mouth and then spit them out.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then hide them someplace like, they're not going to get me.
They're not going to get me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which I think that, like, the best thing that I learned about Alzheimer's and just, you know, living and dealing with people that have it is that their existence is their truth.
Yes.
So in their mind, they already took the pills.
Right.
And you cannot argue. It's like if someone came up to you and told you that the sky was brown.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, it's just not true. The sky is blue. I've seen it 1,000 times. I know what it looks like. You're nuts. And to them, that's how they're living in their reality all the time.
100%. It's a matter of perspective. We actually have on YouTube, and Addie can put in the show notes, a link where there's an exercise where you put your finger up and bring it down, and it shows you just a change in perspective can have you arguing with somebody over the same exact truth. You're both right. You're just looking at it differently.
Looking at it from a different perspective.
And you cannot convince someone that sees something from a different perspective that they're wrong and you're right.
Exactly.
What you do is you have to meet them where they are, right? And you have to figure out, I call it positive manipulation. It's not lying, but it is lying. I've spoke about that a lot is, if you love me, lie to me. Our 19-year-old nephew, Addie's cousin, died at 19. And I was going to lie to grandma when she said, when's little Matt coming over? Because it's not fair to her to have that tragedy relived over and over again. So I would say, well, he's not able to come today, but maybe tomorrow. And she'd say, oh, okay. All right. Some people feel that that's cruel to lie to that person, but in reality, what is your mission and what is your heart? Your heart is not to cause them pain and to have the better days. And so by, throwing in their face, arguing with them, telling what the truth is that you think they ought to know, you're really causing so much heartache and disruption. And it doesn't make them feel any better. And 5 minutes from now, you're going to have the same question.
They're going to ask you the same exact thing.
Yeah.
And so, and I also think that something that I would see Mama do often was she would get frustrated with her and try to tell her, oh no, mother, it's this. Oh no, mother, it's that. And in one respect, I see that it's like, if you're the caregiver and you're getting frustrated all the time, if you yell at them, honestly, they won't remember in 5 minutes.
No.
So you can occasionally let off steam. You don't have to keep everything bottled in all the time, but arguing oftentimes doesn't actually work because it makes them agitated emotionally, and then they can feel that in their physical sense, and then they want to resist whatever you're trying to do just because they feel that physical tension. Right.
So I think it's, I explain it a little bit more like Disney. So Disney knows that they have to have you wait in line to go on a ride. And it's not a great experience. We know we got to get grandma to eat. We got to get grandma to take her pills. That's waiting in line. So how do we tell a story? How do we play trivia games? How do we make this fun? How do we bury it in the applesauce? How do we, do all those types of things so that maybe you don't even realize you've waited in line, but you've got through it and it's part of the experience and it's made it pleasant.
Right.
I've never liked those amusement parks that you just sit there and wait in the heat and there's no, they're not taking your mind off of it.
Right.
And it makes it feel worse.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you can make it a game, if you're not the right person for it, like, it's okay to get frustrated. I think when you start to, especially for somebody super close, like a spouse or a daughter, it can be incredibly frustrated because you know who they were.
Right.
And you've spent your entire life trying to make each other better.
Right.
So that's really hard.
Yeah. And I think that a perspective that was also helpful to me, living with great grandma, was that she's not the same as she was a few years ago, but she still is great grandma Lily. Mm-hmm. She was still the person who, played basketball as a woman, and in these really early days when a lot of women weren't allowed, 1920s weren't allowed to play sports.
Right.
And she would tell me these stories over and over again, which was really awesome because a lot of people with dementia and Alzheimer's really still have good long-term memories. Mm-hmm. So engaging with them in that way is really important. But I think also one of the most shocking things that she used to do was that, like we said, great grandma Lily was a very proper lady and she didn't cuss a day in her life.
No,
right?
No, she didn't cuss. She didn't go out of the house without her makeup or her hair done. She never drove a day in her life. She was a church lady. We all had to dress proper and, even though she grew up in southern West Virginia, they had Cosmo magazines and dressed to the nines. All of her sisters were educated past high school, which was unheard of in the day. I don't even know that I ever saw her in pajamas.
Yeah.
Until she lived with us.
So that being the woman that I've known and that I've grown up going and visiting in West Virginia and spending so much of my life with her, then it would be very shocking to hear her drop something in the kitchen and throw out a cuss word.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that was never something that I thought I would experience ever. And it was so funny to me. And then I had this realization of, it's not that she's never cussed in her life. It's that she's chose for most of her life to not do that in front of certain people, right?
Or maybe she held back the whole entire time.
Yeah.
Some people will get very soft when they were a very harsh personality. Mm-hmm. Because they don't feel like they have to protect themselves anymore. Some people that were basically perfect, like my grandmother was the perfect lady, no longer has all those kind of pent up, what will the neighbors think? What will the church people think? What will this? And she dropped some cuss words.
Yeah.
So
and also from my perspective, it's just, that's who she was at some point in her life. Mm-hmm. That these aren't just anomalies and things like that. It's just not, they might not present themselves in the exact manner that they did a couple of years before the dementia kind of kicks into gear, but I imagine great grandma at some point was cussing when she was dropping stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. I never saw her do it. But she did, when she was younger, she wore a bikini. It was like the shorts and the top, but So she wasn't, and she was a beautiful woman. And part of that is, I think, just like icing the cupcake on the bottom, it peels away all the things that society has told you, no. No. Don't, you're a 3-year-old and you're running around naked. No. You have to put clothes on. No. You can't say the cuss word. No. You can't, take your finger into the cake and eat the icing. You have to eat, your meals first.
Inhibitions sometimes are limited. And
that's a perfect word.
Yeah.
Perfect word.
Yeah.
So having said that, we did have a little bit of a crisis. So my teenage son in high school, comes to me and he's like, Mom, you got to do something. And I'm like, what? And he's like, great grandma came out in her bra and her underwear.
Oh, Lord.
And I was like, oh no. And I wasn't, oh no, for Jacob, whatever, he'd seen, me in a bathing suit. He'd seen, all that kind of stuff. I was, oh no, for her. Like, she would have been mortified if she knew that she did that.
Yeah.
Mortified. And
but
so, we kind of helped her get back into the room, but she just didn't, her inhibitions again were gone.
Right. But it is one of those things too, where a lot of what we talk about in the book, is also that, like, it is funny.
Oh yeah. It was funny.
It's hilarious. And it's okay that it's funny.
Yep.
And a lot of people are very sensitive, like, don't laugh at them, don't laugh or whatever. But there's moments where it is funny, and that's okay. And it's funny to process it like that. And it's okay to, so great grandma also had something where when she would sit on the front porch and we would sit on the swing all the time. And there was this branch in the front of our house, on this one tree. And she would always say, now, Libby, you gotta call the city and get them to cut that tree. You gotta call the city. And about every 5 or so minutes, this would come out. Right?
This would come out. And like, you start off ready to kill the person.
Right.
Like,
you're like, I have heard this story.
I told
1,000 times.
I told you, we've called the city, and then at a certain point, what you end up doing is you just go, hey, I think we need to call the city.
What you end up doing is egging her on and saying, great grandma, don't you want to look at that tree?
Yeah. Like, you should.
We should call the city.
We should call the city, because it'd probably been 7 minits instead of 5 that she brought it up. And so part of being able to laugh together as a family, we're not making fun of her. It's a way to release a lot of stress and love on each other. And if you're the personality, which I certainly am, when someone falls and gets hurt, as long as they didn't get like really hurt, everybody's laughing.
We're laughing. Yeah.
We're laughing. Now if somebody's really hurt, of course, then you got to reel it back and then you take care of it.
Yeah.
Like your aunt when she did virtual reality and
she ran into the mantle.
We all
were
at Christmas.
Silent until we were well aware that she was fine, and then we burst out laughing.
Yeah. So we were doing a virtual reality, and there was a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and she had the goggles on, and each person was trying them, and all of a sudden you see her just haul off, running away from the dinosaur that we can't see because it's imaginary. It's in her goggles, and then run straight into the fireplace, flaps down. I still have the video. It's awesome. Yeah. To be fair, certain people didn't think it was that funny. But it was. Hindsight's 2020, right?
So our point of that little tangent is that you can handle this in a lot of different ways, and you don't have to be solemn and sad all the time. I know a lot of people that work at Kemper House Worthington, which is the Alzheimer's dementia care facility my dad owns, that are full of joy and full of life.
Yeah.
And there's so many funny, cute moments that happen. And it's just about actually engaging with them and not treating them also as just a sad sob story.
Right.
Treat them as a human being. They still have things to gain, and they still have value, and they still have stories, and they still have all these things. And even if they, are nonverbal, a lot of the time they can still hear you.
So I have a great story. Back before my grandmother ever came to live with us, and one of my first Alzheimer's dementia, so almost 30 years ago, homes that I did, It was the company policy that you had to stay all night in the home instead of a hotel when you went in and opened it up. So there would be residents living there that had just moved in because they felt that if you were ingrained into the home, you would figure out that, oh, that's not the right mattress to do, or this is noisy in this area or whatnot. And they were right. So you also had to volunteer. And so I'm sitting on an ottoman and I've got a bunch of dementia residents around me. And the activities director had told me, like, just, lead them in song. We're going to do songs today. I said, okay. And I think sometimes we think when the mind gets a little confused that maybe it doesn't have an opinion anymore. Not true. I was told by everyone there I should never sing ever again.
They might not have been wrong, but
no, that's what I'm saying. They were completely right. But in my mind, I thought they weren't going to understand that I was a horrible singer.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I thought that they wouldn't understand that, but they did. And they asked.
And they told you.
They not only told me, they got the head person and asked that I never help out in that area ever again.
That's
now,
awesome.
Addie's a great singer, but
yeah.
that, like, besides not making 8th grade choir, that hurt my feelings quite a bit.
Yeah. So in essence, we've had so many experiences with people with Alzheimer's, and just there's a lot of life lessons too that you can learn through dealing with someone who has memory issues and things like that. What are some of the solutions and like main focuses that our listeners and viewers can take away so that they can do something kind of right now in their homes?
Okay. So, you can start out by looking to make sure the home is more of an automatic car versus a stick shift. So for someone with cognitive issues, they can't think properly. Every day is like learning how to drive stick shift. And if any of you have ever done that before, it is frustrating. If you've never had the opportunity to do that, take a pencil or a pen and use your non-dominant hand and start writing out your birth date, your social security number, and write out maybe who you are. And it's going to be very frustrating. Those types of exercises help us to understand. So anything that we can do where lights automatically turn on or off, the remote control maybe just has the buttons showing that they need.
So you could tape off certain buttons on the remote. You can label the remote in the phone. I know great grandma used to confuse them all the time, which we laugh at that, but realistically, they're both black things with buttons. I mean,
and they're both about the same shape.
And they both have numbers. So they're really just not that different, which is one of those context things, again, that like, from our perspective, it's like, wow, how could anyone forget that? And from their perspective, it's really an object that looks really similar. So how can we help them mitigate those annoyances? And then we have the issue of security and safety. So a really great story is that one time we were all out and about, and my mom had installed these new kind of nanny cams, security cams, to watch inside
which people had big issues about. They're like, oh, somebody's going to be watching at that point. And what had happened was my mom was being held hostage by my grandmother. She didn't want Libby to leave, and my mom felt bad. And so I said, Mom, we're going to put the camera in right basically in the living room so we can see grandma. If she's just watching TV, you don't have to worry about coming home from dinner quick. You can stay out at Costco a little bit longer.
Right.
All you have to do is look on your phone and you can see that. So it ended up being a good idea for that reason, but it also ended up being a good idea that we're all out and about and the power went out and we're like, oh my gosh, we got to check on grandma. Well, we were able to get on the camera. The power for that had a battery backup.
Yep.
But she was stuck in the recliner.
So we knew we had to rush.
We knew because it was hooked up, and we knew we had to rush somebody home because she could not get up out of the recliner, and you could see her kind of struggling. And I'm like, I don't want her to fall.
Yeah, we're like, Lord have mercy.
Right, and we were able to talk through the camera and say, Grandma, we're here, and she's like, where are you? Like we're a ghost voice or something like that. But that was very helpful. Some other things you can do is you could get Alexa or Google Home to say, hi, it's morning time. It's summer. It's the spring or, whatever. It is time to get dressed.
Right.
Could be time to take your medication. We had a dementia clock that was very, very easy to operate and radio.
And very specific, too, of AM and PMs. I know that there's been plenty of times where when great grandma used to get up in the middle of the night, I was kind of the designated person who would get her back into bed, and she would be up walking around. You'd hear her cane coming, click, 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 click. And I'd be like, oh, Lord, here we go.
You know what? You were the DG instead of the DD. You were the designated grandma.
Yeah.
Gooder.
Yeah. And so one night she's up and she's walking around, and I point to the oven clock and I say, great grandma, it's 3 a.m. You got to go back to bed. And she's like, it's not 3 a.m. It's 3 p.m.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, it doesn't say AM or PM. So
no.
So how would she know that? And secondly, I said, great grandma, everybody's asleep. You got to go back to bed. And she said, well, you're up. I said, well, you're not wrong.
You're not wrong there. It is a lot like traveling in a foreign country. It's very hard to get you regulated. And so having a lot of natural sunlight is great because it kicks off your circadian rhythm that tells you when to wake up and tells you when to go to sleep.
Yeah.
One of the other things is if you can get integral blinds. So those are blinds that are in the window. So they don't get messed up. They still can be like tilted and opened and closed very easily. But you don't have to worry about them getting whopper jawed or somebody having trouble operating them. So those types of things. Locks on the doors that automatically lock when it's nighttime so they can't get out. I used to worry until we got some of those locks that she was going to get out in the middle of the night and be out in the snow.
Yeah. And some other options. I mean, we have a million different options, and we'll talk a little bit more about all this stuff in our technology episode. But you have, even the Apple Watch now has a fall detection feature where if you fall and you don't say, I'm okay, it will call your most recent contact or your emergency contact, however you set it. So there's a bunch of different ways, but I'd say kind of the most important things about helping our loved ones that have Alzheimer's is helping them regulate their diet also, which we'll get into that more later on about, removing kind of sugar.
There's a bunch of diets that doctors have created, from Dr. Brunison to Dr. Amen to quite a few, but sugar's not good.
Yeah.
For your body.
It actually enables things to cross that blood-brain barrier. And it can, and from personal experience, every time we were around the holidays and great grandma was eating a bunch of cookies, she was nuts. And she was just nuts. She just was so off her schedule. She didn't know what year it was. She was not on her money compared to
and then the stress
before
of the holidays.
Exactly.
So, like, oh, it's a cookie. I want her to have it. You wouldn't do that to a diabetic.
Right. Exactly.
So, you still have to limit items, choices, opportunities to be able to let that person be their best them. And it's now your responsibility to help them get through it. You do not give, a 12-year-old keys to the car.
Right. Exactly.
So, if for her, she never drove, but at a certain point, you might have to have that hard discussion about taking away the keys to the car. And sometimes the better thing to say is the car's in the shop.
Right. Exactly.
Instead of argue about things.
Yeah.
Because people can feel like they're having their freedoms taken away. And that's a horrible place to be. I often talk about the fact that when we're younger, and you're a baby, you're incredibly vulnerable, but you don't know it. And so you don't care that someone has to wipe your butt and somebody has to feed you and you have to cry and somebody has to move you. And then we get to this independent stage and life is great. And then we get older and we have our minds to a certain extent. And then people start taking away our dependence or our independence and making us dependent on them, saying we can't do this, we can't do that. You're going to hurt yourself here. I have to help you with the medications. And some of it might be legit, but how we do that is a very important conversation.
Yeah, definitely. So also on the preventative side, which I think we're going to do a whole nother episode of dealing with Alzheimer's and just more tools and tricks that you can use. But from the preventative side, one thing that you can do actually is go to Kemper House Worthington and get your Cognivue test. So it's the first FDA approved cognitive test that enables you to kind of have these baseline markers for whether or not you have Alzheimer's, memory issues, things like that. And even if you don't, if it runs in your family, if you go to Kemper House Worthington in Columbus, Ohio, then you can get that test for free and you have a baseline so that if you do start exhibiting any kind of memory issues, you can kind of know in what facet and in what way.
It's super critical to have a baseline because, you know, especially when you're getting older, you could just maybe be irritated with your spouse. And then they're like, well, you keep forgetting things. You keep whatever. Or maybe, you know, mom, you think she's, you know, having troubles or issues. And really she's just stressed out and she hasn't slept for 3 nights because she just found out you had cancer.
Right.
You know, and so if mom has a baseline and can go get tested, that can put a lot at ease, or it can help with early diagnosis, which is everything.
Which is really important. Yeah. They also have a lot of literature and resources too on brain and body health and how you can kind of combine everything in your life so that you're working towards retaining your memory and working kind of against your genetics and things like that. But yeah, so today we've kind of talked about a lot of different things, mostly a lot of personal experience and some helpful things.
We kind of let you in behind the curtain.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we have much more information, specific information in our book Hive. But first things first is that you're just not alone.
Yeah.
You're not alone. And there are a lot of people that are dealing with this, and there is a lot of people that could relate to what you're going through. And there are many, many tools to help yourself as a caregiver or also help your loved ones. There are so many different tools that you can utilize. And there are a lot of ways to be proactive as well. So it's daunting when you get that first diagnosis or when you see the cupcake, but it's not the end of the world. And
and it's also like, you know, we got to have some beautiful time with grandma. You know, we have this unique perspective because of our 19-year-old nephew. You know, he was gone in a moment from a car accident. We didn't get to have that time to know he was going to go and to spend time with him. And also he was very young. And with grandma going, we got a lot of time to ask her a lot of questions and really dive into her sweet spot. You know, she loved to talk about older things, pulling out the photo books and really starting to document the family history that I don't think I would have, you know, I was kind of hypersensitive to this story might be lost if I don't get it now, which was cool.
Yeah. And so one thing that you can do today to have a better tomorrow is just sit down with your loved one and spend some time with them, and don't argue and don't correct them, and just be present with them. And I'm sure that if you take the time to do that, and remember who they are, that you will have a beautiful moment with them, even when they're going through this hard time.
I think that is fantastic. I think one of the biggest lessons that I found with grandma was that I didn't always have to solve a problem for her or have a conversation. Sometimes she just was, more often than not, the majority of the time, she was just wanted me to sit with her while she was watching a basketball game. She just wanted me to be with her, you know, and just be. Not have some agenda, but just be. And that's a pretty cool thing. You don't have to solve this. You just kind of have to show up.
Time stops when